A few years back, probably around when I was 26 and still figuring things out, I had this job as a field biologist. Most days, I was by myself out in the middle of nowhere, which I usually loved. This particular story takes place deep in the Appalachian backcountry, somewhere in a thick pine forest that looked like it hadn't seen people in 100 years. I was out there surveying wetlands, and while I wasn't brand new to the job, I definitely wasn't a grizzled veteran either, just in that awkward middle zone where you know enough to feel confident, but not enough to always stay out of trouble. Now I'm always careful not to trespass when I'm working. The last thing I need is a shotgun in my face. So before every job, I'd pull up the county assessor's maps, print out who owns what, and make sure I only stepped on public land. For this survey, I spotted a public access road that snaked through a chunk of Forest Service land. There was a private driveway that branched off it, but the main road itself was fair game. I double-checked, definitely government property. I pulled off to the side of the road, maybe 30 or 40 yards from a locked gate leading into someone's private land. I was driving a clearly marked state vehicle, 2 big decals on the side, and everything. No mistaking me for some lost hiker or random trespasser. Anyway, I grabbed my gear and headed into the woods. This forest was something else. Huge old growth pines towering above me, but thick brush on the edges like nature had built a wall around the place. About 200 yards in nature called, and well, I'm a field biologist. Doing your business in the woods becomes second nature. So I found a quiet spot, took care of it. And that's when I started hearing someone yelling near my truck. I remember thinking, oh great, now I've got to deal with this. I started getting myself together to head back when bang, 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 gunshots. And not the kind you hear off in the distance. During hunting season, these were close. Way too close. I froze. No way I was walking straight into that. As I'm trying to figure out what the hell to do, I hear someone crashing through the brush at the edge of the trees. He's coming into the woods. At this point, I'm just standing there, thinking, this is how people disappear. This area is remote, and let's just say the locals don't exactly roll out the welcome mat for strangers. There's a reason this particular county has more game wardens than anywhere else in the state. I trusted my gut and took off in a crouch, trying to keep low and quiet as I moved deeper into the forest, aiming to reach the main road, about 600 yards away. That's when more shots rang out. Only these sounded sharper, louder, like they were coming in my direction. I didn't see him, but it felt like he could hear me moving. Maybe he was just firing blindly, but it was enough to kick my adrenaline into high gear. I kept going, heart pounding in my chest, until I made it to the main road. I ducked under this little bridge, hoping he hadn't followed me that far. First thing I did was call a buddy of mine just to tell him where I was. Figured if anything happened, at least someone would know where to start looking. Then I called 911, first time in my life I'd ever done that. Of course, the dispatcher didn't believe a word I said, told me it was probably just someone shooting at cans. Eventually, I got patched through to a deputy, same reaction. Super dismissive, like I was wasting his time. Meanwhile, I'm still hiding out, not sure if this guy is still hunting me or what. I started walking further up into a public hunting zone, just trying to stay somewhere I might run into someone else. Thank God a game warden happened to come through and stopped. I told him everything, and unlike the others, he actually took me seriously. Soon a couple of locals showed up too. They told me the guy whose land was near where I'd parked wasn't even from around there, some transplant from Louisiana, with a reputation for being, well, let's just say unfriendly. I'd met a few of the real locals before, and they'd always been chill with me, so that explained a lot. After about an hour, the lazy deputy finally showed up and offered me a ride back to my vehicle. Here's the kicker when we get there. That same guy is sitting on an ATV right next to my truck. Just waiting. He's got a rifle across his lap, just chilling in the dark, like he's out of a damn horror movie. I didn't say a word to him. Just walked straight to my truck and got the hell out of there. By then, it was close to 9 p.m. I still had a 4-hour drive home. I remember being so exhausted, but also wide awake from the stress. I thought about confronting the guy or mailing him a map showing where his property line actually ends, but I didn't want to poke the bear. Who knows what that guy was thinking? Maybe he really thought I was some creep. Or maybe he just didn't like outsiders. Either way, after that, I started carrying a firearm whenever I was out in the field, just in case. A couple of years back, my girlfriend and I decided to take on another stretch of the Appalachian Trail. We'd already hiked a few sections over the years, but this time we wanted something a little more remote, something quiet. So we picked a lesser-traveled part that cuts through the southwest side of Virginia. It winds through miles of forest, weaving its way between Rowan Oak and a little town called Pearisburg. Honestly, we were hoping for a break from the usual crowded trails and loud campers blasting country music at 9 a.m. We kicked off the hike in early October, right when the trees were lighting up in oranges and reds. That time of year, the air is cool enough to keep you comfortable, but not so cold you're miserable. We had our sights set on finishing the route near Damascus, and once we got there, maybe crashing in a local motel before heading home. Most of the trek was exactly what we wanted, quiet calm. And honestly, kind of meditative. But it was the last 2 nights that flipped everything upside down. According to the guidebooks and forums, you're supposed to camp either directly on the trail or use one of the designated shelters. But we were hoping to avoid random people stumbling across us in the middle of the night. So instead, we veered off trail and found this perfect little clearing tucked between a few hills. It felt secluded, like we were the only 2 people in the world. We pitched the tent, made a simple dinner, talked for a bit, and eventually crawled into our sleeping bags. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up to my girlfriend shaking the hell out of me. She whispered, more like hissed, that someone was outside, walking circles around our tent. She said it sounded like they were dragging something sharp along the fabric. That jolted me awake real quick. I always carry protection when we hike, just in case, so I quietly reached for my Judge revolver while she stayed dead silent. Eyes locked on the tent wall, like it might move again. The wind rustled the trees for a few minutes, and then we both heard it. Snap. Crunch. Snap. Heavy footsteps. Definitely not a raccoon or deer, coming from the woods behind us. I grabbed my flashlight and crawled out of the tent as quietly as I could. Our fire had long since burned out, so it was pitch black, aside from the glow of the moon hanging low through the branches. I didn't turn on the light right away. I figured if someone was out there, I didn't want to advertise exactly where I was standing. I waited, holding my breath, until I heard more movement. Sharp, cracking twigs, under slow, deliberate steps. When I finally switched on the flashlight, it caught what looked like someone darting behind a tree about 30 feet away. I shouted something like, "Hey, I'm armed. Back off," and moved closer, sweeping the beam side to side. Just as I started walking toward the spot, I heard footsteps take off from a completely different direction. Someone running through the brush. I spun around and aimed the light that way, just in time to hear the original set of footsteps take off too. Like there were two people. I wasn't about to chase anyone through the woods in the dark, so I backed up toward our tent gun up the whole time. I filled my girlfriend in, told her what I saw, and spent the rest of the night sitting outside the tent, staring into the darkness and trying to convince myself it was just some prankster. At sunrise, I did a lap around our site. That's when I found a boot print, fresh, deep, and way bigger than either of ours, just a few feet from where we were sleeping. I didn't mention it to her. No reason to freak her out more than she already was. We packed up faster than usual and hiked almost nonstop the whole next day. Barely speaking, I couldn't shake this feeling that we were being followed. There was no solid proof, just a nagging sense of unease, like we weren't alone anymore. That night, I picked a campsite up against a rock wall near a ridge where nothing could sneak up on us from behind. We kept the fire low, and the weapons even closer. She had the 1911 that night, and I kept the judge on my lap while pretending to relax. I managed to stay awake for a few hours, scanning the dark woods around us, but I guess I passed out at some point. What woke me later was the unmistakable sound of someone rummaging through our stuff outside the tent. I nudged my girlfriend awake and whispered for her to stay still. From the faint firelight and the shape of the tent, I could see the silhouette of someone crouching over our gear. I shouted something like, "Back off, we're armed," and the figure immediately bolted. I stormed out gun drawn and found our supplies scattered everywhere. Whoever it was had gone through almost all of it. I followed a path to the edge of the creek that ran past our site, and just across the water, I spotted a faint, flickering light. At first, I thought it was a lantern. Then, more lights popped up. 3 more, all from different directions, weaving through the trees. I ran back to the tent and told my girlfriend to start packing up whatever we could carry. We left the tent behind and grabbed only the essentials: food, weapons, our boots, and water, and hit the trail under cover of darkness. As we walked, I could swear I heard voices in the distance, soft, quiet conversation, and the occasional crack of branches from somewhere too close for comfort. I kept turning around, flashlight off, scanning the trail behind us. At one point, just as dawn started creeping in, I turned back and saw a figure step onto the path behind us. They just stood there, not moving, not speaking. I called out, asked who they were, what they wanted, but they just stared. Then they slowly turned and slipped back into the woods. We didn't stop again. We pushed ourselves until we finally made it to the end of the trail where her car was parked. We were beyond exhausted, but honestly, we were just relieved to be out of there. I don't know who those people were or what they were doing out there, and I don't even want to guess. Whether it was some off-grid squatters, backwoods weirdos, or people just trying to scare us. I'm done with that part of Virginia. Next time we hike, I'm picking a trail with a bathroom and a snack bar. This happened last summer, sometime in June, when my boyfriend, our dog, and I decided to take a little camping trip near Asheville, North Carolina. We were camping close to the Appalachian Trail, not far from a river where we'd spent most of the day kayaking. It had been a pretty wild day, some sketchy water, a couple of surprise swims, and overall, just enough chaos to leave us totally drained by the time we got back to our site. Our spot was maybe 10 feet from the trail, and the river was just beyond that, so it was a really peaceful setup. We were relaxing me on a towel near the tent, my boyfriend swaying half asleep in a hammock by the water, the dog snoozing nearby. And we had just taken some edibles because, well, that's how we like to unwind after a day like that. Out of nowhere, this random guy wanders onto our site. He had a huge backpack and an AT shirt on, so it was obvious he was a through hiker. At first, he just starts rambling about trash. Literally, I couldn't figure out what he wanted until he finally said he was hoping we'd take his trash and throw it out for him. Normally, that wouldn't be weird. Hikers do try to offload stuff when they can, but we were literally 5 minutes from a parking area with a dumpster and public restrooms. So it wasn't like he was deep in the back country or anything. I told him that, but then he pulled out this giant bag of weed and said he'd give me some if I took the trash. I mean, free weed. Sure, why not? So I said, cool, took the trash, got a handful of nugs, and we chatted a bit. He said he'd been hiking for a few months, seemed normal enough, and asked if he could hang out and have a beer. I figured he probably just wanted some human interaction, so I told him sure. But I did get the feeling he hadn't realized I wasn't alone at first. He kept glancing toward the tent, like he was surprised when my boyfriend popped his head up. Once he realized I wasn't solo, he kind of shifted his energy, but still stayed. He kept saying things like, "Don't worry, I'm not one of those creepy guys." Which, like, thanks for the heads up, I guess I tried to keep it friendly and casual. Asked him about trail stories and stuff. And for a little while, it was all pretty harmless. But once we broke out the river pipe to smoke, because, again, we're stoners, and it was chill, we offered him a hit out of politeness, since he gave us the weed. And that's when things started to take a turn. He took a big hit, coughed like crazy, and then started acting off. He wouldn't stop talking, but it was so quiet and mumbly, we couldn't understand a single word. Mostly, he was just staring at the river, having this one-sided conversation with himself, and would occasionally glance over at us, like we were supposed to respond. It was weird. Like, really weird. He wasn't threatening or anything, but there was this uncomfortable vibe that got worse the longer he stayed. And he wasn't exactly in a rush to leave either. He drank a few beers, chain-smoked a couple of cigarettes, just completely settled in, like he was planning to be there for the whole night. The tipping point was when he started yelling at Siri on his phone, full-on shouting at her, calling her a B*********, and getting visibly angry. And then, totally out of nowhere, he asks, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I seem like a serial killer? Like, what? My boyfriend and I kind of side-eyed each other, like, yeah, this dude's officially freaking us out now. We laughed nervously and said, oh, A1, totally harmless. But inside, we were both screaming. I decided enough was enough and climbed into the hammock with my boyfriend, hoping he'd take the hint. He claimed he was going to smoke one last cig before heading out, and I swear to God, that cigarette took a decade to burn down. I just sat there watching it slowly disappear, praying he'd pack up and go. Eventually, he did leave, but it was already getting dark, so we figured he probably didn't go far and would just pitch his tent nearby. That night, we were on edge the whole time. Every little crunch of leaves or sound on the trail had us convinced he was coming back. A few people did pass by, some sketchy-looking folks we'd seen earlier, who might have been living up the trail. But luckily, none of them were him. We even made a whole escape plan in case he returned to grab the dog, jump in the river, float downstream to the boat ramp. Thankfully, it didn't come to that. He never showed back up. But to this day, I still can't tell if he was just awkward and lonely, or if he had something darker going on. Either way, I'm really, really glad I wasn't out there alone. Last year, my friend, let's call her Julie, and I got it in our heads to go backpacking through a stretch of the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina. This particular trail was kind of off the grid. Nothing super popular or touristy, just one of those quiet ones, with a Boy Scout camp somewhere down near the base. We figured we'd spend about 4 days hiking from one side of the mountain to the other. Get some fresh air, disconnect a bit, and hopefully not get eaten by a bear. We drove separately, and when I rolled up to the trailhead, a narrow dirt road next to a creek, Julie was already there. There were maybe 3 other cars parked in the same area, including hers. I parked, we geared up, and started the uphill grind. The trail immediately slapped at us with a 3,000-foot climb. And we hit that around 3:00 in the afternoon, perfect time to get your legs screaming. Now, I'd only ever been backpacking a couple of times before. Most of my camping experience up to that point had involved someone else doing all the prep checking weather, figuring out gear, all that stuff. This time, though, I was the one who picked the trail. I basically saw some pretty pictures online and thought, yeah, this looks chill. Spoiler alert, it was not chill. Julie, thankfully, had a lot more experience. She'd actually worked for a company that led groups of kids on hikes through the Appalachian Trail, so she knew what she was doing. She'd looked into the weather before we got there and casually mentioned we were likely in for a week full of thunderstorms. Oh, and just to keep things spicy, she also told me that the trail had recently been in the news. Apparently, someone connected to an unsolved murder had last been spotted somewhere along that exact road. Comforting, right? But honestly, none of that really sunk in for me at the time. I brushed it off like, whatever, just weather and weird rumors. As we made our way up, we passed a few people, probably the owners of the cars, back at the trailhead. First, there was a couple with a super cute dog. Then we saw a guy carrying a full backpack, clearly planning to camp somewhere. And finally, there was another guy with trekking poles who looked like he was just out for a day hike. We didn't think much of it at the time. By the time 5:00 p.m. hit, we were completely wiped out. The climb was no joke, and we were ready to set up camp. We found this open patch not far from the summit, nice and clear, no one else in sight, and decided it was a good spot to stop for the night. You could tell others had camped there before because of old fire rings, but the place seemed deserted. After pitching our tents, we wandered up the hill a little bit to collect some firewood. That's when we stumbled on something odd. A tent just sitting there, totally set up, but with nobody around. At first, we left it alone. Because, who wants to poke around someone else's stuff? But as the sun started to go down, and we still hadn't seen a soul, curiosity got the better of me. The rainfly wasn't even on, so I peeked through one of the little mesh flaps. Inside was weird. There was a damp sock, 3 empty Cliff Bar wrappers, and an unopened condom just lying in there. It looked like someone had just up and left without packing up, but not like they'd been gone for long. Still, with no one around and no signs of anyone returning, we just went back to our camp, made some dinner, hung our bear bag, and crawled into our tents. And like clockwork, right as I zipped my tent door shut, the rain started. Perfect timing, right? I'm not great at sleeping outdoors, to begin with, especially on a hard surface. So the night was kind of a blur of tossing, turning, and trying to get comfortable. It was so dark that I couldn't tell when I was dreaming or awake. At some point during the night, I thought I heard voices, 2 people coming up the trail from the direction we'd hiked earlier. They stopped just a few feet from our campsite, whispered something I couldn't quite make out. And then I swear, I heard one of them walk right through our camp. When I woke up the next morning, I actually felt pretty rested, which was weird given how restless I'd been. We were eating breakfast when I mentioned the strange dream I'd had. Julie just looked at me and said, "That wasn't a dream." I heard it too. That's when we both noticed the footprints, right through our camp. They weren't ours. We decided to go check out that abandoned tent again, and yep, still there, still untouched. Whatever was going on with it, we didn't stick around to find out. We continued our hike up toward the summit, but the trail was so overgrown near the top that we could barely get through. Between the non-stop rain, the weird night visitors, and the general vibe, we decided to just cut the trip short. We turned around, hiked back to our cars, and got the hell out of there